Hello, this is Conversations from the Alcove from the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. My name is Caridad Svich, and I am the Artistic Director of New Play Development at the Alcove, which is the new play development program at the Lucille Lortel Theater. It's a lot of words, you know. And what I will say is that we have this conversation series here on YouTube. It launched in January of 2023. And by the time you're watching this is probably our second season. So if you're catching up with us just now, welcome. Check out the back catalog that we have online. Wonderful conversations with artists, but also this new season that we're in. Conversations from the Alcove is a conversation series devoted to talking to playwrights and theater makers about art, craft, and the world. Sometimes not in that order. And what I will say is that I'll briefly audio describe myself and also tell you where I'm beaming in from. So I am beaming in from the land of the Nape, known in English, bad English as Manhattan. And I am a fair-skinned person with brownish, auburnish hair. I have bangs. I have my hair sort of in a ponytail to one side. I'm wearing tortoiseshell kind of cat eye glasses, red lipstick. I have brown eyes. I'm wearing a black top. And then I have faux pearls on top of my black top. Behind me is a white background, but you'll see in a corner, depending on where you're looking in, probably the outline of a lamp. It is a real lamp. It is not a fake lamp. It is there. So you'll see it in the corner. And today's guest is the wonderful, multi-talented, multi-hyphenate person of all things, a writer, filmmaker, actor, musician. Oh, my heavens, all these things. Daniel Yorklow. And they've written many works. They've acted in many things. I won't list all their amazing credits, but here are some of them. Their first stage play was called The Fu Manchu Complex. It was produced at the Oval House in London. They have most recently performed in Semmelweis in the West End. And Every Dollar is a Soldier, With Money You're a Dragon, with Chinese Arts Now at Two Temple Palace. He is Associate Artistic Director of Kaki Lang, where he is developing, and by the time this premieres, have produced with Soho Theatre, the Tao of Unrepresentative British Chinese Experience, Butterfly Dreams. So very short. Daniel has a lot of credits, but I won't, more importantly for the conversation, you can look up his credits online. Daniel, where are you beaming in from? All the things.
Where, what, sorry?
Where are you beaming in from?
London, West London, Ladbroke Grove, yeah.
Cool,
Notting Hill, I suppose is what.
Notting Hill, officially Notting Hill, okay. Known by some people by a movie made long ago.
A very beige movie, I have to say. It kind of it caucasized the area. Let me say that it's not like that at all. I have to say.
I know, it's not like that at all. Also known for the Notting Hill Carnival.
Absolutely. It's a famously.
More representative, yes.
Very famously, extremely diverse neighborhood, rich history, race relations, a riot or two, the carnival. If you watch Steve McQueen's Small Axe, there's a whole episode basically which is all about what happened in Notting Hill in the 70s, I think, with the African Caribbean population and their dealings with the racist police. Yeah, it's a great episode. I'd highly recommend watching it.
Indeed, thank you. Well, I start these conversations with the same question for all the artists, which is a massive question, and I can't, imagine that there's one answer to this, let alone one that can be solved in the next 5 minutes. But what I will say is that the question is, we're in a climate crisis, and how is this affecting your art making, thinking about art making, and also the way you produce?
I think it definitely reflects what I write about, because it feels like there's a reckoning going on. I think we're in a dark place. I think the world, and I think the climate is, I mean, it's kind of there. Like the play I'll have on, it will be running, I think, by the time this goes out. The Dao Van Representative British Chinese Experience at Soho Theatre. It's basically about, I mean, it's a mythologized version of my life, but it's a kind of drug addiction, crime, recovery, activism, but it's also shot through with Chinese philosophy, Taoism. Taoism is about being at harmony with the universe, with ancient Chinese cosmology, which is all about that, really. And I've also written other plays that touch on that. It's interesting, just because I can't really write divorce from the world around me. It was really when we were in lockdown, we did Royal Court living newspaper thing, and I remember being put in one of the groups on Zoom to talk about what we were going to do, and there was a whole debate about, and a lot of people were going like, I just don't want to write about COVID. I don't want to write about the lockdown, and to me, it's kind of bizarre. I don't want to throw shade on anyone, but it's kind of bizarre to think like that, because it's almost like writing a play set in 1948 and ignoring World War II. I think, do you know what I mean? It is just a massive epochal thing, it's just huge. And likewise, the climate. I'm not an expert on it. I don't, I've been on the protests, I've been on the marches. I can't quote the stats or the figures, but it just kind of plays on my mind a lot. So it's always in there with everything, really.
Yeah, I was reading an article this morning on extractivism and the layers of extraction that are happening, especially with lithium, obviously, as a commodity, but also the history of extractivism, pre the Industrial Revolution. And so that, this notion of extraction is nothing new, except that during the rise of fossil fuels, it has mesticized to such a degree that it's actually affected literally every single layer of our lives, including, what people are discovering now, and maybe they've known it already, but like where scientists are talking about, we have microplastics in our veins, right? Like that in a sense and they didn't know this. Right. So, and that's a result of what? Fossil fuels. So I'm thinking, but in terms of being an art maker, and yes, I agree, like be in the world, please. But I think that there's something around, I agree, not ignoring what we're in, and also that it need reflect. Like I always slightly joke around when people talk about they're writing realism, but then there's no mention of the climate crisis in their work. I know. And I'm just like, I don't know what reality that is. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And so I feel like both in terms of subject matter, but also I wonder in terms of form, if that's changing the way you think about the formal aspect of what you make.
It is. I mean, it's funny that the play that I read at Lortel, Racist Actor, I mean, I kind of wrote that. I was working on it during the first part of lockdown with Leo Butler kind of dramaturging me, because I was on a Royal Court group, and he'd seen something I'd written. He said, if you put some of this together, you can make a play out of it. And I did. And what kept going through my head is I want to write something that you could do in a car park. You know what I mean? I kind of, because I thought there'll be no more theatres. But the bizarre thing to me is theatre now, definitely in Britain, I don't, it's so high tech these days. It's all about lights. It's all about pyro. I can't think it's that environmentally friendly, to be really honest with you, a lot of it. And it does make me wonder. And I'm talking about my show as well. I mean, but I don't want to, again, you get directors and designers on board and they just want to go nuts. I mean, I kind of like, and I'm always like, I don't like, budgets scare me. Budgets really, like the budget for this is making me dizzy. And when I say that, it is nothing anywhere near what goes on at the Royal Court, at the Royal Shakespeare Company, at the National Theatre, at Hampstead, it's just, this is fringe. What we're doing is fringe. And it shocks me that fringe theatre costs that much and uses that much resource and everything. I do think about it a lot, and I like to find a way of making theatre that was just literally people in a field. I'd really love to do that, basically. but it's so hard. It's so hard to kind of get anyone to even consider that, and everyone, you know, everyone works ridiculous hours, so you can't, you know, unless it's in the middle of summer, you don't get daylight hours, so you're gonna have to use some lights or something. Do you know what I mean? It's yeah, I don't know. I do think about it a lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something. I remember when I was chatting with Tim Crouch about touring Truth's a Dog, and he said, "This is a photograph of my set," and it was literally one chair. And I was like, yes, that is probably the way we should be thinking about how to make things mobile. If we're going to be mobile with the stuff, then it has to take up as little effort as possible, and also, you know, that when you arrive at the thing, it also takes as little effort as possible exponentially. You know, it's not like massive trucks and, like, you know, all the stuff that goes along with touring. And, you know, I think there's ways to be nimble, and I think we're all imaginative people in the art. We're supposed to be like the engineers of the imagination. Isn't that the phrase that people use to describe us? And at the same time, I feel like there's a lot of retrograde kind of thinking, or maybe it's stagnant thinking around the ability to change and adapt and evolve.
Yeah, I mean, I do think that, and it's unfortunately such a capitalist industry. There's no getting around it, and the resources win. That's the problem. The resources win every time. For every Tim who's got a picture of his set as his one chair, we both know this. That there, and it frustrates me sometimes, because you'll know, you'll go to the kind of the big theatres and you'll see the big shows with all the pyro, and you're thinking, yeah, I'm wondering what this would look like upstairs in a pub on chairs reading the script. I'm wondering, would it be that good? I'm not. I don't want to name names. I've seen a few things in the last couple of years, and I just thought, if this was in a fringe theatre, I think people would laugh at it, because it's on a big stage, you know, and it's in a fancy theatre, and people have paid a lot of money to see it. They go, oh wow, this is genius. And I don't necessarily think, I don't think it is a lot of the time, I'll be really honest with you.
Yeah, I hear you completely. I mean, I'll sort of segue to talking about your work because you do straddle a lot of different areas, and I wonder how they all feed into each other. But specifically, this more recent material, Racist Actor, Every Dollar, The Tao of Unrepresentative British Chinese Experience, Butterfly Dreams. I'm going to say the whole title. Yay. I wonder, because to me they feel like a triptych of sorts, and maybe I'm wrong about that, but that's how I received it, how I experienced them as a reader. And I wonder how this recent work sits within your body of work, but also how you're thinking about future material that you're making.
No, I think they are a kind of triptych. I mean, they're all written in the same year or two. I mean, I suppose the Tao of Unrepresentative British Chinese Experience, that started 2.5 years ago, so that's kind of gone on. Racist Actor was before either of them, and who knows, that might carry on, because I do want to try and get that on afterwards, and I don't think it needs an awful lot of resources. I say that now, but as you know, as soon as you start, the costs just mount, and Every Dollar was kind of sandwiched in between them. So they are a kind of triptych, and it was me really finding a way of making theatre rather than trying to write plays. I don't know if that makes sense to you. I felt like before I was trying to write plays. I was always trying to write plays, and I've got a couple of plays, and I quite, you know, I'd like to see them on, but I don't know if I ever will see them on. I don't know, but I kind of like it was much more about, and I'll be brutally honest, I put myself at the center of it a lot more. But that was probably a resource thing, just because I kind of started thinking about let's try and pare it down a bit. Let's try and not need. I mean, this sounds ridiculous because we're not talking a lot here. Let's not need 6 actors, you know, which is, I mean, that's kind of the limit these days. It's shocking. I do have a play called Spring Autumn, which I wrote on attachment at the National Theatre, I've done about 3 drafts of it. It needs a lot more. It needs a lot more. And the thing they said to me when they took me on attachment is, this is your opportunity to experiment with writing on scale. And it's a humongous, huge play, basically about Confucius and Confucianism. It's huge, and I really like lots of it. It's massive, and needs a lot of actors. And I did write with the Olivier stage in mind. I totally did. And those productions that were on when I was coming through drama school, like the one I kept thinking about was Pravda, which weirdly I never saw on stage. I only ever saw bits of it on the South Bank show or whatever. But I kept thinking about Pravda, and I kind of wanted to write an East Asian equivalent of that, but it didn't. You know, they weren't going to produce it, but. It is very much about kind of finding you know, and I watched a lot of Edinburgh Fringe stuff where you get people, you know, like Jamal, I've forgotten his second name now, the British Iranian theatre maker. He kind of does these plays that are about things, but he's in them, if you know what I'm saying. But oddly, it doesn't feel like a navel gaze. It feels like the subject's still very, the politics of Iran, the politics of the Iranian diaspora is still very much there, but he's just kind of in it. And I started to become very attracted by that idea, and also coming to Kakilang, which is Chinese Arts Now then, and working with Anting, who's the composer on Every Dollar, is a composer on Dao. It was, you know, when she brought me into the company, you know, the whole is we're an interdisciplinary company. We're not a theatre company. We're supposed to kind of concentrate on music, drama, dance, visual art, everything. And I thought, I can't write a play with a table and 3 chairs for this company. It has to be something whacked out, bold. It has to have a lot of kind of spoken word poetry, dance. I started working with dancers the last few years and really enjoyed that. And it just felt like, I don't know, my way of making something that was total theatre rather than trying to write a well-made play, which I mean, I'm kind of intrigued by, but let's face it, it's very difficult these days because half the critics in the world fancy themselves as dramaturgs, so they sit there critiquing your structure when you're 10 minutes in. You know what I mean? And they go, oh, that scene 2 just seemed in an odd place, and it's like, you maybe if you watch to the end, you'll see why. You know what I mean? I maybe it's not meant to feel right. Maybe it's meant to feel like, you know, all this. I know. You know, I've read your work as well, and it's amazing. It's kind of so playful in form and everything, and I can feel like you're having the same conversation with yourself and with the art form. I can definitely feel that in your work, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I think that you know, it's interesting because when I teach playwriting, I'm teaching right now. When this airs, I'll be on hiatus, but at NYU, and because it'll be summer. But I think one of the conundrums that I have is that, you know, it's a playwriting class, so I'm supposed to be teaching, you know, this is what a play is, and all I want to do is like go see some dance, go see some, I know. You know, go see a concert, go see some dance. And I have nothing against plays because, you know, I find plays fascinating, and obviously it's a very old form, but I feel like to understand the experience that you have with an audience, which I think that's what plays do. You have an experience with an audience. Actually, I think thinking only about plays can be very limiting. And so I think one of the first things I did in class was I asked the students to watch Crystal Pite's The Truffenheit, the performance capture of that, you know, because it's so extraordinary, and also because the way it uses lip sync, and, you know, it's just very sophisticated in what it's doing. You know, there's puppets. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff happening in that show. And the students that came back, and they were like, I've never seen, you can do that? Like, what? This is wild. And I was like, yes, and, you know, and so I think that, but then you had other students in the class who were like, but is it a play? And I was like, is it theater? Is it theater? Like, what are we doing? Is it theater? You know, and I think that the theater is a big tent, you know, and I think that often I think often plays get, there are all different kinds of plays, let alone, you know what I mean? So I think there's the well-made, which is a very, you know, it's a 19th century phenomenon. is a weirdly colonial standard that's been imposed upon artists, I think. And so, and that colonialism of the mind, but also of form, has affected us all, because I think that, I've joked about this in the past with my colleagues, but there seems to be a, how can I put it? You're vetted. You're a real writer, in quotation marks, once you have done a well-made play.
Yeah,
Do you know what I mean about this? And if you're an artist from the global majority, that's the aspiration in a weird way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't feel I'm regarded as a playwright in Britain at all. I really don't. I just not. And I think what you're supposed to do, if as an artist from the global majority, is write the well-made play. And also, if you have a socking great big lead part for Jeremy Irons or someone, I mean, this is it. And lots of East Asians running around Jeremy. I mean, I can't even. It's so. Yeah, I don't feel I'm regarded as a playwright, because I don't write those kind of like, I call them imitation TV dramas, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. When that's done well, it's still good. And I don't, like you say, it should be a very broad tent, but. I mean, I got really inspired. I mean, I think years ago, I couldn't get a job at all, and I was working in a call center, and it was just, the call center was just sort of next to, virtually, Sadler's Wells Theater, and you could get in for a £5 in those days. And I remember going to watch like Japanese buto dancing and kabuki and stuff, and I'd have the cheap seat in the balcony, just hanging off the balcony like that. And you have to like I'm a kind of working class. I was a working class kid. I even then I'm uneducated. Kicked out of school when I was 16. Locked up in young persons remand centers and stuff. So it's not like I was intellectually drawn. I was just kind of inspired by the visuals and everything. And it just made a lot of sense to me. And then my first experience of working with a dancer is I did this thing called. It was called June 4th Backdrop, but it ended up being called Invisible Harmony because we didn't want to get censored before it went on. It was the first thing I did with Chinese Arts Now, which is now Kakilang. But basically, it was part of this Tiananmen 30, the 30th anniversary of Tiananmen Square. And I'd left this poetry thing I'd written with the director, and she called me up and she said, "Do you know Julia Cheng? And she's an amazing dancer." I said, "Yeah." She said she's read all the script and she wants to do yours. And I was like, yeah, please, and it ended up that was just an amazing thing. She was like dancing to my kind of rhythmic poetry. It was just amazing. Yeah, amazing experience.
Yeah, super cool. How does and I don't know if you do this, but I know you sometimes are in your own work, but also you do other people's work as an actor. So how do you navigate that? Like when you're in somebody else's show, what does your actor brain do?
I'm probably a little bit more protective of the writing than a lot of other actors are. I'm probably a little bit. I don't. I think some people would worry that if they have an actor in the show who also writes, they're going to be very critical of the writing. And I don't think I'm any more critical of the writing than anyone else. I'm genuinely a bit more. I probably a lot more actually. I'm a lot more kind of like when people say that bit should be cut. I kind of try and think from the writer's point of view and what they're trying to, what questions they're trying to ask, what they're trying to get across. I mean, I enjoy it, and I feel like I kind of learned a lot about writing from the stuff I've been in, and I'm lucky enough. I mean, although my acting career has been humongously frustrating because I was kind of racially pigeonholed a lot of the time, but they're not racially defined enough to fit the pigeonhole and make it work for me. So it was frustrating, but what that meant is I had an incredibly diverse career, and I've done everything from kind of like, grungy fringe, new plays, classics, and that's been amazing for me, and I've learned a lot about writing and language and how it hits with an audience and being on stage and doing it. But I don't feel like I'm the type of person who kind of, I mean, one of the things, and you must know, I'm sure you know this as a writer, that there's people you can send your plays to, and there's people you can't, because their feedback will inevitably, they'll start writing their own version of the play. They'll sort of say, Caridad, that's great, but I wonder if that character can have an affair with this character, and this is not what you want to write about. And you're going, well, maybe you should write that play then. But I don't feel I ever do that, really. I don't sort of sit there. You know, I occasionally want more lines myself, but I don't sit there kind of rewriting an idea of the play in my head at all. No.
Yeah. Has any of your acting like gigs, have they inspired your writing? Have you like made a show based on, like maybe not based on, but maybe you're like in a show for a long run or a short run,
Yeah.
and then somewhere in the middle of it, you're like, you know what? I'm thinking of a play that I want to write, or a theater piece that I want to make. Has it ever happened that way, or does the idea to make a piece as a writer come from a different part of your brain?
Yeah, they probably do, but I don't think I think about it when I'm doing it. I'd say all the writers that I've worked with have kind of inspired me in a lot of ways. And I would say probably in terms of writing East Asian subject matter, the writer I've been in 2 of her plays. I'm not sure I'll ever be in another one, because she got very angry with me about she did Frances Yarchu Cowhig. She did a play at Hampstead called The King of Hell's Palace, and they wanted to fly in American actors for it. I mean, look, I have nothing against American actors. Please, like, look. If it was a fair exchange, I'd say do it. But you know, American equity are very, very protective about that, and rightly so, because you know, and especially the publicly subsidized stage in Britain. I mean, and look, I actually checked this out. You know, if you were flying in Sandra Oh to sell tickets, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I can't see anything wrong with it. But if you're just flying in, you know, regular actors to do jobs that British based, I'm not saying British born, British based East and Southeast Asian heritage actors they need those opportunities. I just think it's wrong. So I protested that, and she was very unhappy with me. Before that, I did 2 of her plays. I did one called The World of Extreme Happiness and one called Snow in Midsummer. And I really loved the way she would elevate everything onto a kind of mythical Chinese landscape, and she would reference like a lot of the Chinese literature canon is massive, and the Chinese philosophy canon, it's just massive. And the way she would reference those, and I always felt that what she wrote was kind of like dark Buddhism. You know, it was you know, and that kind of influenced me quite a lot when I was writing Forgotten, which is my play about the World War I Chinese Labour Corps. I probably moved a little bit beyond that, you know, away from it now, just because, like I say, I've gone in a more poetic way. But I learned a lot from her about shocking an audience without resorting to shock tactics, if that makes sense, you know, you know, and building it, you know, and also there was I will say this, I think as an actor, one thing I learned from her, some of her early scenes were quite, it felt like we were just pumping a lot of information, but quickly. She would get there quickly. And I felt like she was laying a lot of groundwork for deep tragedy in the second half of the play. And I felt like a lot of critics weren't willing to go there with her on that. And a lot of the actors weren't willing to go with her on that. And I always kind of got that. I thought, oh, I can see what she's doing. I can see what she's doing there. I find that clever. I find it really clever because, you know, I think a lot of writers, myself included sometimes, kind of mess around trying to make those first 3 or 4 scenes. I mean, you do have to grab people, don't get me wrong. But you know, all this kind of careful, you know, and all the juice with her stuff was in the second half. The payoffs were enormous if you were just willing to sit there with that. But yeah, a lot of it to be honest, and some of the classics I've acted in, you know, Christopher Marlowe or whatever. Brecht is a huge. I mean, Brecht just gets me thinking all the time, to be honest.
Yeah, I hear you. Yeah, totally. I wanted to get to probably a question that you know, may open up a different vein of the conversation, which is around the state of the industry and at the moment, which is quite precarious, but also I think maybe poised in a position to in a position, I think, to actually change in a beautiful way if it wants to, and also the forces that are kind of acting against that. Sometimes they're internal, sometimes they're external. A lot of them are external. But yeah, I wonder about, and especially because we're artists, so I think that also we're talking about like the reality of which we're living. That is also a reality in which we are writing, right? We're writing in this reality of an industry kind of in somewhat of a free fall, having shall we call it an identity crisis of sorts, like, questions about, is it theater, which I think is like ridiculous question to ask of a piece of work that is theater. And so I just wonder, like, as a maker of work and a collaborator with people on work, like how these questions of the state of the industry, where it's headed, where it's been, all the issues within that are affecting not only the work that you make, but also thinking about how you can affect change.
Well, I'm very much a commenter on the industry. I mean, I would say if I'm known for anything, it is that even in things that don't seem to be about theatre at all, I'm always having a commentary on it, because theatre has defined me in many ways. It's defined my life. It's kind of accentuated a lot of issues and that I've faced and sharpened them. And
So I think we've lost Daniel for a second. So I'm just going to stay online and hope that Daniel returns. They seem to have frozen on their end. So I'm just going to carry on and hope for the best. While we're here in Conversations from the Alcove, as I wait for Daniel to come back, I just wanted to say that, part of the conversation series is around looking at the situation in the world as artists, that when we make work, there's a part of it that feels like we're diving into another world, right? And that's something that we do as art makers. We actually can create another world. We can model a different kind of world, model, and I use that in quotation marks. But I think Daniel has just disappeared on his device. So I will stay online. Hopefully they will return. I will keep chatting with you all out there in the universe, which is to say that I think that, one of the responsibilities that we have as artists is to consider the positioning of our work. And that's a tricky consideration, because sometimes you just want to make something because you're moved by it, right? You're moved by a subject, you're moved by an image, you actually don't know why you're compelled by something, you want to chase the unknown. I think the mysterious is a really important place to work from as an artist. And I think that, what I will say around this is that I don't think we should shy away from those strange hunches, those impulses that we have as art makers, to chase them, to chase ideas down and to chase subject matter down and to kind of respond to the ineffable in our art making. I think the other part of it is that we are in the world, right? And that's and I think that as much as art making can be a portal into something else, I think art making is also a way to contend with, respond to, critique, challenge, provoke, insert stories, respond to injustice, respond to abuses of power, respond to the polycrises in our midst. So I think that theater specifically does have a unique space for that. It has a unique space for that to work and to achieve and to be whole. And so I would argue, with myself at the moment, and with you in the audience, that one of the things that I love about theater is that it's able to do this in a way that can feel sometimes, purely, sometimes through whimsy, sometimes to delight, sometimes through other means. And I think that that's something that's worth looking for. The other thing I would say is that I feel like in theater, when we make, we are actively trying to figure out a new way of dreaming. So Daniel is returning to us. Do not worry,
Yes.
Daniel. I have been giving a lecture while you've been away.
Well, I'm sorry I missed that.
No worries at all. I've been talking about the responsibility of artists, but also talking about spaces for dreaming that is important to us as artists. So you can jump in where you were left off before technology got in the way.
Yeah. I was saying there's that cliche that people like Anthony Hopkins and Tom Hardy sort of say, acting or theatre saved me. I think if anyone was going to drive me back to drinking, drugs, and crime, it's probably theatre. So I do comment on it a lot. I've never been enamored of the industry, and if anything, it's got worse. It is. It's in a terrible state. And I think an oddly kind of unengaged state. I don't think it engages very much with the state of the world as it is. I think it actively tries to avoid it a lot of the time. We've also got to a ridiculous place where political work is interesting. I'm taking a motion to the TUC, the Trade Union Congress, Black Workers Congress conference this weekend, and it's basically about censorship in the arts and particularly voices around Gaza. And it's interesting because the government here, but I think they try to clamp down on the Arts Council. The Arts Council here did these whole guidelines about reputational harm, and you have to be careful what you're saying. And then they rode back when everyone protested. When I was putting what I would say to move the motion, I came across something they issued in 2022, which is when the Ukraine war had just started, and the invasion of Ukraine, I should say. And it literally was Nadine Dorris, the culture secretary at the time, was really encouraging, saying, art can be a valuable tool to kind of unsettle the Putin regime. So they kind of want it to be political when they want it to be political, and they don't when they don't. And that's a dubious state of affairs. And I think we've also got very careful. And look, I'm not one of these people who says, trigger warnings, get rid of them, because I don't believe, I think there should be trigger warnings. I don't know. And I don't read them personally, but there should be there. But I don't think, people think the trigger warnings is what's sanitizing theatre. I just disagree completely. I think what's sanitizing theatre is the fact that a lot of us just don't want to go there at the moment. And it's really worrying. And I think to be honest, I think theatre's got itself in a bind where it kind of imitates film and TV. I read this really terrifying article about Hollywood the other day, the fact that, a lot of the streamers, and they're all owned by asset management companies. So everything's about producers, and everything goes through kind of like, and I think drama depends on giving the audience something they don't really expect. And we're getting to that mindset. We're trying to give them what they expect. And there's a whole thing about existing IP, which is, you take the Marvel films, their existing IP. Apparently, I think it was 2 years ago, 64% of Hollywood films was existing IP. And that's happening in theatre. I don't know. You hear that all the time. You get regional theatres and they'll say, unless it's a famous book that you've adapted or something very local, I don't know if I can put it on. That's dark. To me, that's dark. That's just really worrying. And it's just not a healthy, conducive environment. I don't think it's, and we have this idea, we come into theatre because we want to be kind of radical and make change and kind of, and I don't think the industry is run by change makers or radical people at the moment. It's run by centrists. It's run by quite dictatorial people, quite censorious people. There's a lot of, I think, more bullying than ever. Actually, it's just the way we've dealt with bullying in the industry is to talk about things like raised voices and bad language. As we all know, like there are people who can bully very, very well without raising their voice. I'm pretty sure some of the worst industry bullies were very good at being polite in meetings. That's so. I don't know all that stuff you were saying about a place we can dream. I don't. The environment is so unconducive at the moment, and as a writer on your own, how do you navigate that? You need to collaborate with people, and I think I've got a pretty good team around me at the moment. I mean, a lot of the times you won't have that, and that's really hard. That's really hard.
Yeah, there's a, how shall I put it? There's a kind of I think it's double. There's a double bind happening. So one of them is financial concerns, right? So there's a kind of like, well, we don't want to antagonize the audience because then they won't buy the ticket. But we depend on the revenue to bring back the thing, and like, there's this kind of like catch-22 that's happening. But also, I think there's maybe, I think, a how shall I put it, a mistrust of the audience. They won't be able to understand blah blah blah, and I'm just like, but people who are like watching all kinds of things on film, on TV, on streaming, whatever, like, the pretty sophisticated storytelling happening in a lot of different platforms, you know what I mean? And including in music, right? Like, people listen to all kinds of music that's doing fairly sophisticated things. And so why is theater suddenly like, oh, we can't make it too complex because then people won't. And all it does is, I think, create this mentality, I think maybe from audiences, where it's like, well, if I go to the theater, it's supposed to be easily consumable, and I'm supposed to understand everything at every moment. And you know what I mean? It's sort of, it's kind of like back. I do think that it's a lack of trust of the audience. And I always think audiences are smart, you know what I mean? And you have to come in thinking they're smart and they're up on things, and they maybe, their lives are complex and difficult. And our job is actually to kind of have that encounter with them, with the complex and difficult things in the world, whether it's through comedy, whether it's through tragedy, the genre doesn't really matter in a way, but because I also want to avoid I'll call it the David Hare syndrome. So the David Hare syndrome, which is, you know what it is. I mean, it's like the big important play, right? Like the big important play with a capital I, State of the Nation. And God bless him. I'm glad that he's still writing and cares about theater, to be honest, because really, he does, you know what I mean? Like,
he does care.
He does care. Like, that's like amazing. But I also think that kind of way also can be a little bit, how shall I put it? Patting yourself on the back a little bit, if you know what I mean. Like, I wrote the big important thing because I'm a big important person addressing the big important world, as opposed to, let's have this experience together, audience. And maybe there are big important things being discussed or broached or whatever, but the author is not the authority. Does that make sense?
Yeah, totally makes sense. Yeah, it totally does. I mean, I don't. Yeah, the lack of trust in the audience is interesting, and I wonder if that's because we probably depend on our audience more than anything. I mean, everything depends on an audience. I mean, if you spend, 100 million, 300 million on dollars on a film, and nobody goes to see it, that's obviously going to hurt the studio. But it's still, you can watch a film on your own in a cinema, and it's amazing. Watching a play with only a couple of people in the audience is quite hard sometimes. It's hard for the performers. It's hard for everyone. And there's a sense, I think we feel we have to kind of give them exactly what they want all the time. When I think what they want, as long as you are exciting them, as long as you are, engaging them, I think they'll go with you. I think they will, definitely. And there is a sense. Somebody told me there was a composer I used to know, and he told me about years ago. He was up at the old Leicester Haymarket, and there was this German theatre company doing their avant-garde Coriolanus or something. And he said somehow they'd marketed it, and there was all these like girls who worked in Woolworths coming in and watching it. And they all loved it. They all absolutely loved it. And there is a sense you have to be able to get people through the door, but when they're through the door, you can totally kind of, and I think that's what people come for, to be challenged in some way. Not and I'm not, there's a thing people say sometimes, like, I really want to push the audience, I want to provoke them, and and that sounds quite violent in a way. I always feel I don't feel it's necessary to do that. I don't you know, I don't like the stuff I've written about racism. I try not to kind of feel like I'm getting at people in the audience who might be watching, you know, like white people, like, you're so racist. That's a bit unfair, you know what I mean? It's quite unfair, I think, you know, to kind of do that to an audience. But I think you can shock them, thrill them, terrify them in the realms of the drama, basically, and make them laugh out loud and make them cry and make them want to love each other at the end of the night. You know, you can definitely do that.
Yeah, and I think that one of the, I think that this goes back to this conversation around form, which is, I think, to some degree, which is what makes theater different from other forms, even though we steal from the other forms all the time because we're in the arts, right? So we have to, right? So there has to be cross-pollination. But I think that I was talking to a colleague yesterday, and they said to me something I think quite stark, and it's related to this article around that I think you're referencing about Hollywood and the streaming situation. But this theater colleague was saying to me, the worst thing that can happen to theater is for it to depend entirely on being TV and film adjacent.
Yeah, well, that is what's happening, I think.
Yeah, because actually theater does something else. And as much as we can draw from the other art forms beautifully, if you're going to have a theater experience, whether it be hybrid, digital, or in person, I think that it brings something else to the table. It has another kind of way of operating. And that's what's thrilling about it. I think that that's what makes it unique. Just like, you know, a painting is different from a video installation, different from a sculpture, right? You know, so so what I worry a little bit about, I mean, partly this goes back to what you were saying around plays wanting to be like, you know, like a TV show, but you know that actually that's wrong-headed, because actually that's not the best that theater does. If you're aiming for what's the best thing that theater can do, it's actually something else, because film, TV does that so much better. If we're thinking photorealistically, I also think film is a dream medium, and I think that it's a medium that actually is very abstract. And that maybe one of the things that we can learn from film is how abstract it is, right? Like that you can literally cut from somebody opening a door to the next moment they're in a field. And you're like, that's actually incredibly abstract. We're not seeing like the person getting out of their house and then going to the thing and then getting in the car. We're literally going, cut, boom, and they're there. It's almost like magic, right? And so there's in film, there's always this notion, unless you're doing anything in real time, there's this notion that we're actually kind of compressing and escalating and chopping time up, which I think in theater is actually uniquely suited to do as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think so, and I think you're right. I think oftentimes what we find ourselves imitating in film and TV is an idea of what film and TV is, and it's not necessarily the case. I think you know, there's so much kind of, you know, it's the use of medium, basically. It doesn't, you know, you look at all the great films. There's kind of stylistic elements in them. All the great TV series, there's stuff happening that you know. I mean, it's interesting. I got a free Apple TV subscription, and so I watched a bit of TV. But the way, especially a lot of American TV, the way it plays with kind of jumps in time, like you're going back and forth. You know, it's not. You know, it places a certain challenge on the viewer to kind of stay with that, but we have this idea that I think some of us have got in theatre, which is the audience, you know, in the TV age, they haven't got the concentration span. They won't be able to take it. We you know, and again, I just don't think it's true. And that there's you know, there's the idea that we can't take too much dialogue these days. We can't take too much boring dialogue. No, of course not. But we can definitely take dialogue. We can take all those things. We can take poetry. We can take, you know, flights of imagination. It can absolutely happen. But I think what we're imitating is kind of the safest, easiest path a lot of the time.
Yeah, the safest, easiest path. And also, I think, speaking of poetry, I think that a colleague and I were chatting the other day, and there was like, I was sort of complaining and whining and all those things, but about like, well, poetry is so like amazing. Like one of the things that drew me to theater was poetry, right? Like I was just like, oh my gosh, this is a poetic. Not only is it a poetic space, but it's also where poetic language can be used, and including the writer that everybody exclaims all the time, Shakespeare, right? So and then for some reason, if you're making theater, often I think what happens, at least in some circles, is not too much poetry now. Don't do too much poetry.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, but actually, that's one of the foundations of our medium, and it's also because it started in kind of speech song and kind of chant. Hello, this is Conversations from the Alcove from the Lucille Lortel Theater in New York City. My name is Caridad Svich, and I am the Artistic Director of New Play Development at the Alcove, which is the New Play Development Program at the Lucille Lortel Theater. It's a lot of words, and what I will say is that we have this conversation series here on YouTube. It launched in January of 2023. And by the time you're watching this is probably our second season. So if you're catching up with us just now, welcome. Check out the back catalog that we have online. Wonderful conversations with artists, but also this new season that we're in. Conversations from the Alcove is a conversation series devoted to talking to playwrights and theater makers about art, craft, and the world. Sometimes not in that order. And what I will say is that I'll briefly audio describe myself and also tell you where I'm beaming in from. So I am beaming in from the land of the Nape, known in English, bad English as Manhattan. And I am a fair-skinned person with brownish, auburnish hair. I have bangs. I have my hair sort of in a ponytail to one side. I'm wearing tortoiseshell kind of cat eye glasses, red lipstick. I have brown eyes. I'm wearing a black top. And then I have faux pearls on top of my black top. Behind me is a white background, but you'll see in a corner, depending on where you're looking in, probably the outline of a lamp. It is a real lamp. It is not a fake lamp. It is there. So you'll see it in the corner. And today's guest is the wonderful, multi-talented, multi-hyphenate person of all things, a writer, filmmaker, actor, musician. Oh my heavens, all these things. Daniel Yerklow. And they've written many works. They've acted in many things. I won't list all their amazing credits, but here are some of them. Their first stage play was called The Fu Manchu Complex. It was produced at the Oval House in London. They have most recently performed in Semmelweis in the West End. Every Dollar is a Soldier, With Money You're a Dragon, with Chinese Arts Now at Two Temple Palace. He is Associate Artistic Director of Kaki Lang, where he is developing, and by the time this premieres, have produced with Soho Theatre, the Tao of Unrepresentative British Chinese Experience, Butterfly Dreams. So they're very short. Daniel has a lot of credits, but I won't, more importantly, for conversation, you can look up his credits online. Daniel, where are you beaming in from? All the things.
Where, what, sorry?
Where are you beaming in from?
London, West London, Ladbroke Grove. Yeah.
Cool,
Notting Hill, I suppose is what.
Notting Hill, officially Notting Hill. Okay, known by some people by a movie made long ago.
A very beige movie, I have to say. It kind of caucasized the area. Let me say that it's not like that at all. I have to say.
I know, it's not like that at all. Also known for the Notting Hill Carnival.
Absolutely. It's a famously.
More representative, yes.
Very famously, extremely diverse neighborhood, rich history, race relations, a riot or two, the carnival, Yeah, if you watch Steve McQueen's Small Axe, there's a whole episode basically which is all about what happened in Notting Hill in the
Yeah.
70s, I think, with the African Caribbean population and their dealings with the racist police. Yeah, it's a great episode. I'd highly recommend watching it.
Indeed, thank you. Well, I start these conversations with the same question for all the artists, which is a massive question, and I can't, imagine that there's one answer to this, let alone one that can be solved in the next 5 minutes. But but what I will say is that the question is, we're in a climate crisis, and how is this affecting your art making, thinking about art making, and also the way you produce?
I think it definitely reflects what I write about, because it feels like there's a reckoning going on. I think we're in a dark place. I think the world, and I think the climate is. I mean, it's kind of there. Like the play I'll have on. It will be running, I think, by the time this goes out. The Tao of Unrepresentative British Chinese Experience at Soho Theatre. It's basically about. I mean, it's a mythologized version of my life, but it's a kind of drug addiction, crime, recovery, activism. But it's also shot through a Chinese philosophy, Taoism. And Taoism is about being at harmony with the universe, and ancient Chinese cosmology, which is all about that, really. And I've also written other plays that touch on that. It's interesting, just because I can't really write divorce from the world around me. It was really when we were in lockdown, we did the Royal Court Living newspaper thing, and I remember being put in one of the groups on Zoom to talk about what we were going to do, and there was a whole debate about, and a lot of people were going like, I just don't want to write about COVID. I don't want to write about the lockdown, to me, it's kind of bizarre. I don't want to throw shade on anyone, but it's kind of bizarre to think like that, because it's almost like writing a play set in 1948 and ignoring World War II. I think, do you know what I mean? It is just a massive epochal thing. It's just huge. And likewise, the climate. I'm not an expert on it. I don't, I've been on the protests, I've been on the marches. I can't quote the stats or the figures, but it just kind of plays on my mind a lot. So it's always in there with everything, really.
Yeah, I was reading an article this morning on extractivism and the layers of extraction that are happening, especially with lithium, obviously, as a commodity. But also the history of extractivism, pre the Industrial Revolution. And so that, this notion of extraction is nothing new, except that during the rise of fossil fuels, it has, mesticized to such a degree that it's actually affected literally every single layer of our lives, including, what people are discovering now, and maybe they've known it already, but like where scientists are talking about, we have microplastics in our veins, right? Like that in a sense that, and they didn't know this, right? So, and that's a result of what? Fossil fuels, So I'm thinking, but in terms of being an art maker, and yes, I agree, like be in the world, please. But I think that there's something around, I agree, not ignoring what we're in, and also that it need reflect. Like I always slightly joke around when people talk about they're writing realism, but then there's no mention of the climate crisis in their work.
I know.
And I'm just like, I don't know what reality that is. Like that doesn't make any sense to me. And so I feel like both in terms of subject matter, but also I wonder in terms of form, if that's changing the way you think about the formal aspect of what you make.